Genesis 39. We're going to read about a woman we don't know what her name is. Just like Roger's wife. That would like to be known throughout all history as Roger's wife. Genesis 39. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered. That's just weird to think about. I mean, he's a slave, and he prospered. I don't know how a slave can prosper, but he did. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. That also sounded kind of interesting to me. So you're a slave, but you're actually living in the house. Maybe that was not unusual. Maybe it was. When the master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. When his master heard the story his wife told him, saying, 'This is how your slave treated me,' he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined." What are your thoughts? I mean, we basically have three characters here in this story. We are kind of focusing on Mrs. Potiphar today, but what are some things that you think that we can learn from this story?
I don't think I noticed it before, but Joseph, when he is telling her that he's not going to bed with her, I guess it's the first time that I've noticed, maybe because of the lesson that was this morning, but how he said, "How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And he doesn't say sin against Potiphar, who technically, I mean, kind of sort of are, but he mentions God, not Potiphar. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
It was day after day. One of the commentaries said that kind of tradition, and they quoted someone else that said it probably was about a year that she had been doing this. Who knows? the other thing that you kind of wonder about is that day that he went in there and there were no servants in the house. Was that just a coincidence, or had she arranged that there would be no servants there, to try to further, get what she wanted? What else do you see and observe and learn from this?
I mean, she certainly has all kinds of negative qualities in this story.
What are they?
She's not faithful to her husband. She's willing to lie. She's willing to let him be thrown into prison for her own. She's got a lot of stuff going on, I think. But I don't think her husband's doesn't show a lot of great qualities either, in that he doesn't know enough about what's going on in his own household. That he's given up lots of control of the household to Joseph already, because Joseph maybe does a better job than he does at taking care of business. And
sounds like he's going out and playing golf every day.
Yeah, and then once his wife does make the accusation, he doesn't do enough to figure out. I'm sure all those servants in the house probably knew the true story of what's been going on for a year, and wouldn't be too difficult for him to find out. But, the quick, easiest way to take care of that embarrassment is just to get rid of.
Yeah. It's interesting. It says he got angry, he was furious or whatever, but it doesn't really say who he was angry at or what he was angry about. I mean, he could have been really ticked off, like, how did this situation happen? Everything was going so good, and now I got to deal with this. Now, because he knew that Joseph was favored by God.
Yeah, best thing that had ever happened.
Yeah.
In one way.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. It says that he didn't worry about anything except the food he ate. It made it really sound like he just totally abdicated everything. And like you said, I mean, maybe Joseph was doing it better, but he was just kind of like, he's got disconnected and out of touch.
It's not too surprising that he might not have a great relationship with his wife.
Yeah.
If that was his MO.
Yeah. Yeah. So
pretty self-consumed in his own.
The Potiphar was not a king, but he was it seemed a high up official.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
wealthy and really about the kingdom business and not really about maybe his own household. And it just makes you wonder, did he have multiple wives? Was this, the household was just kind of a...
I even wondered if he, like sometimes these officials, I wonder if he was a eunuch. If he could have even been a eunuch and she was just a, just
a show wife,
a trophy wife thing. What's that?
He was head of the King's Guard, right?
Yeah.
He was a soldier.
Captain of the guard, that's soldier.
So, it seems like every time I read this story, we're really focusing on Joseph and how he was, his integrity, how he fled. And that's certainly, we can learn a lot from that. It's like, I don't even want to be in a situation, where I could be tempted. But for some reason this time, because it's about Potiphar's wife, I started looking at it from her perspective. She was tempted. We think about Joseph being tempted, but she was tempted. She didn't have something in her life. She didn't have that intimacy that, like Dale was talking about this morning, that we were created for intimacy. And when you don't get it in the right place, you're going to get it from somewhere. And she was tempted. And why was she tempted? And that's what a lot of this lesson goes into, is that she was bored. She had idle time. She wasn't productive with her time. She wasn't doing something. She just had this free time, and she's sitting here looking at this guy, and she maybe doesn't have the intimacy in her life, and now so she's tempted by Joseph. There's not too many physical descriptions of people in the Bible. You hear about David, he was ruddy, and you hear about Absalom, and even, I can't remember if it was Elijah or Elisha was bald, stuff like that. And, we hear Joseph was well built, So she was tempted. And, we shouldn't be surprised that someone of the world would react in a way like, I want that, because she doesn't follow the same values that we are taught through Christ. So
I would think too that she may be used to getting what she wanted in that situation.
Yeah.
I mean, it would not be unusual for a wealthy person to be able to get what they wanted from somebody,
especially from a slave,
from somebody who's lower than them, or any situation. I mean, there's lots of history that talks about the sexual immorality of this time period. So she's somebody who's probably not used to getting told no by her servants or somebody she wanted something from, which could be.
Well, I was also thinking, now, correct me if I'm wrong, couldn't Potiphar have killed Joseph?
Yeah.
So if he could have killed Joseph, then when you're talking about him burning with anger, it may have been against his wife, because, I mean, if there's some kind of precedence of behavior like this, then he may understand and just want Joseph away from his wife, just putting him somewhere else. And so that might have explained why he put him in jail rather than killing him.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's probably true. I think he probably realized, it's probably in the first time she's done something like that. He's seen her character before, other people know, and he really, Joseph found favor in his eyes. So he really liked Joseph, so I think he spared his life, probably. So,
but he had to do, the way that system worked probably to save face.
Yeah.
He had to do something.
Right.
Likely. So he probably did it.
One commentary said Joseph might have actually just moved to a different place in his house. Since he was head of the king's guard, I don't know if he was like a jail warden or if he actually was a warrior, a soldier or something like that. But anyways, who knows? We know the rest of the story. But so, part of what this lesson kind of focuses on is that, how do we avoid falling into a situation like Potiphar's wife was in, where she was tempted and she headed down this pathway. Of course, a lot of it has to do with, she just didn't have the same values and morals that we do as Christ followers. But there are still lessons that we can learn, and some of those might be to think about, when are we most vulnerable to temptation? Tell us, like in your own life, when are you most vulnerable?
Well, when you're talking about sexual temptation, it's when you're not connected.
Okay.
When you're not connected with your spouse, when you don't have that connection, then, like you said earlier, you're going to look for it somewhere else, because that's our human need.
I can tell you from the man's standpoint, that is extremely true. Like if you are not intimately connected, then, just like I said earlier, you're going to find intimacy somewhere. And sometimes you find it in the wrong place. So, that's a good point. When else would you might be susceptible to temptation?
Well, isolation or being alone. Because there's not that level of accountability, possibility of being caught, and stuff like that. It makes me think too of, forget where it is in the New Testament, talking about our Father who sees what's done in secret. So it's not something we obviously know that, there's always someone watching, there's always someone to see that. But like with Potiphar's wife, whether orchestrated being alone with him, or even knowing that there's this temptation going on. A better option would be to have him moved out of the house so that the temptation is not there on a regular basis, or something like that too.
Let them work out in the barn or something.
Yeah.
So we have this LCU student female that comes over and cleans the house, and Jana really tries to make it where she comes over when I'm not there. But there's still some times whenever she's coming over there and I'm at home, and we really try to make it where me and her aren't in the home at the same time without anybody else. I mean, it doesn't always happen, but yeah, just not being alone or isolated. What else? What other times are you vulnerable? Are we vulnerable to temptation? Is it when you're exhausted? Is it when things are going bad? Is it when things are going really good?
Probably more the former, when you're tired, fatigued, stressed, but also, when you're not connected to God, when you're not, that's not a priority in your life. Like you said, we need intimacy and connection with God, and if we don't get that, we'll seek something elsewhere.
That's really good. That saying, if you're not, there's a lot of different iterations of it. If you're not, living, you're dying. If you're not growing, you're atrophying, or if you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards, or whatever. If you are not actively seeking God and that intimacy, that relationship with Him, and in the Word, and engaged in that, or connected, like Heather was saying, in that relationship with Him, then you're going to be vulnerable to falling into Satan's traps and lies.
And I would say, in a marriage, it's even more important to do that together. That pursuit of relationship with God is not just in isolation. Because even if she's pursuing God and I'm, but in some ways we're not fostering that in each other and doing that together, that's another source of way of us being disconnected and not being one together.
Yeah.
And can be another source of
like that. Okay, let's end with a prayer. Father, thank you for this time that we could be together and connect with each other, get to know what's going on in each other's lives. And I pray for each family here that you would strengthen us, that you would give us wisdom, that you would give us discernment, that you would help us to be patient, help us to be slow to anger and quick to listen. Father, help us to be keenly aware of Satan's schemes and the way that he tries to discourage us and to confuse us and lead us down the wrong pathway. And I pray that we can learn from this story to stay connected, to not isolate ourselves, to be aware when we are lacking intimacy and seek it in a way that would honor you. Seek that intimacy with each other, seek that intimacy with you. And we just pray, Father, that we would honor you in our lives. It's in Jesus' name we pray.